Okay, look, you don't apply for a job here. Not really. You just sort of end up with it. A quiet offer that feels more like a summons. The kind that comes after a background check so deep, it probably knows what your grandfather dreamed about on his 10th birthday. The paperwork was a lesson in existential dread. All non-disclosure agreements that threatened things worse than prison. Things that were vague and anatomical. And the orientation was just a man with a face you forget, before he even left the room telling us that the map we thought we knew of the world was a child's drawing, and we were about to see the real Atlas. My post was Building 7, Sublevel 3, a long concrete corridor they called the Quiet Hall. My job was simple. Sit in a small booth from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Watch the monitors that showed 4 different angles of this empty hallway, and press a specific sequence of buttons on a console every 58 minutes. Not 57, not 59, 58. The man said if I ever missed that sequence by more than 10 seconds, I should just walk out. Not run, but walk. Directly to the surface and never look back. He didn't say what would happen if I did look back, but the way he didn't say it was worse than any explanation. The first few nights were a special kind of boring, the kind that seeps into your bones. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound, a constant, droning note that felt like it was tuning my brain to a strange frequency. The hallway on the monitors was always empty, just pale gray concrete and a single, unmarked black door at the very end. I never saw anyone go in or out. I just pressed the buttons. A sequence of 12 that felt random. Like I was playing a chord on a piano made of static and fear. On the 4th night, I saw the first thing. It was around 2 in the morning, the witching hour, or so my grandma used to say, on the monitor for camera 2. The one that showed the middle section of the hall. A shadow moved. It wasn't a person-shaped shadow. It was more like a patch of deeper darkness that detached itself from the wall, slithered across the floor, and then vanished just before it reached the other side. My hand froze over the console. My heart was a frantic animal trying to beat its way out of my chest. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to come back, but nothing happened. The hallway was just a hallway again. I thought maybe it was just my eyes, the tiredness playing tricks on me. But then I remembered the rules. Rule number 4, to be precise. Personnel may observe anomalous visual phenomena within the quiet hall. These are to be ignored. Reporting them is grounds for immediate termination. So I didn't report it. I just pressed my button sequence at the 58-minute mark and tried to forget the way the shadow didn't just move, but seemed to flow. The next week, it was a sound, a low, rhythmic scratching, like something heavy being dragged very slowly across the concrete. It came from the hallway itself. Not from the speakers, the sound was in the air with me. I looked through the thick glass window of my booth, but the hall was empty. The monitors showed nothing, just that endless, empty corridor. The scratching went on for exactly 3 minutes, and then stopped as abruptly as it started. My palms were slick with sweat. I wiped them on my pants and focused on my breathing. Rule 7. Auditory phenomena are a known byproduct of the environment. They are not a breach, do not investigate. So I didn't, I just sat there, listening to the silence that now felt louder and more threatening than the noise had been. The weirdness became routine. That's the strangest part. You get used to the impossible, it becomes just another part of the job. The shadow showed up every Tuesday and Thursday. Always the same path. The scratching happened on Mondays. Sometimes it was scratching. Sometimes it was a wet, squelching sound, like something big and meaty being turned inside out. I learned to time my lunch around it. The real trouble started a couple months in. It was a Wednesday. I was feeling pretty normal. All things considered, I pressed my button sequence at 3:18 in the morning. The console gave its usual soft beep of acknowledgement. And then, nothing. The hum of the lights changed. It dropped in pitch, from a high whine to a low, guttural thrum that I could feel in my teeth. All 4 monitors flickered and went black for a full second. When they came back, the hallway was different on camera 4, the one focused on the black door at the end. The door was open, just a crack. And from that crack spilled a light that wasn't a color I could name. It was like a gray that was also green, a color that hurt to look at. And from the open door, I saw a hand. It was long and pale, with too many joints in the fingers. It gripped the door frame, and then another hand, just like it, appeared. They weren't human. The fingers moved in a way that was all wrong, like independent worms. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't on the list of ignorable phenomena. This was new. This was bad. The rules started flashing through my mind, a frantic slideshow of do's and don'ts. The one that stuck was the first one they had drilled into us. Under no circumstances is the door at the end of the quiet hall to be opened. If you observe that it is open, do not look at what emerges. Initiate lockdown sequence gamma immediately. Lockdown sequence gamma. I fumbled for the key they kept in a sealed box under the console. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely break the plastic seal. The key was cold and heavy. I shoved it into a hidden keyhole on the side of the console and turned it. A siren didn't blare. That would have been too normal. Instead, a series of heavy, mechanical thuds echoed down the hall. Like vault doors slamming shut deep within the earth. On the monitors, I saw thick metal shutters descend from the ceiling at both ends of the quiet hall, sealing it off. The hands on the doorframe twitched violently. And then, slowly, they withdrew back into the room. The door remained open, that terrible non-color light still bleeding out. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the screen, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. About 20 minutes later, my booth door opened and 2 men in crisp, gray suits walked in. They didn't have the tired, resigned look of the other security guys. These men had eyes that were too calm, too empty. They didn't ask me what happened. One of them just nodded at the monitor and said, "You followed procedure good." The other one placed a small, black device on my console. It emitted a low pulse that made my ears pop. "This is for the tinnitus," he said, though I hadn't mentioned any ringing. They left as quietly as they came, and 10 minutes later, the monitors showed the hallway was back to normal. The door was closed. The shutters were gone. It was just a concrete corridor again. I finished my shift in a daze. The next night, there was a new rule taped to my console, handwritten on a small slip of paper. Rule 42. If lockdown sequence gamma is initiated, personnel must submit to a mandatory 24-hour observation period post-shift. Failure to comply results in permanent reassignment. I didn't like the way they said reassignment. It sounded a lot like disappearing. After the door incident, things got quieter for a while. The shadow and the sounds kept to their schedule. But I felt different. I felt like I had seen behind the curtain, and the show wasn't for human eyes. I started noticing smaller things, details I had missed before. Sometimes, on the monitor, I would see my own reflection superimposed over the image of the hall for a fraction of a second. But it was never quite right. Sometimes the reflection would be smiling when I wasn't, or its eyes would be closed. One night, I saw it slowly shake its head no. I started having dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but dreams. The dreams were the first sign that the job was getting under my skin in a way that felt permanent. They weren't the standard monster chase nightmares. They were worst because they were so empty. I would find myself standing on a plane of dark, glass-like rock that stretched to a horizon that felt too far away, above me. A sky the color of a fresh bruise was dotted with 3, sometimes 4, moons, each a different sickly color, a pale green, a washed-out orange, a dead gray. There was no sound. Not even the whisper of wind. Just a silence, so complete it felt like a physical weight on my eardrums. I would stand there for what felt like hours, just looking at those impossible moons, and the feeling wasn't fear. It was a loneliness so deep and vast it made my chest ache. It was the feeling of being the only thing that had ever had a thought, the only thing that had ever had a name. In a universe that was cold, dead, and indifferent, I'd wake up not screaming, but gasping, my mouth filled with the sharp, metallic taste of old pennies, and that feeling of profound isolation would cling to me for hours, making the real world seem thin and fake, like a poorly painted backdrop. But the final straw, the thing that shattered the already cracked glass of my sanity, happened on a Tuesday. The shadow had already made its scheduled appearance, a blot of living darkness sliding from one wall to the other before dissolving. I was left with the drone of the lights and the slow, creeping countdown to my next button press. 58 minutes on the dot. I was fighting off the drowsiness, my eyelids heavy, when movement on camera 3 snagged my attention. It was a man. He was wearing the same dark blue security uniform I had on. He was walking down the quiet hall from the direction of the main corridor, towards the unmarked black door at the end. At first, I felt a jolt of mundane confusion. Had there been a shift change I wasn't told about? Was this some kind of inspection? But then I really looked at him. His walk was all wrong. It was too stiff, too deliberate. Each step was a precise, mechanical motion, like he was a marionette and someone was pulling the strings just a little too tight. There was no swing to his arms, no natural sway to his body, just a straight, rigid march. I leaned forward, my nose almost touching the cool glass of the monitor. My breath caught somewhere deep in my throat. I watched him, this man who was me and wasn't me, as he got closer to that terrible door. And that's when he began to change. It started at the edges. His silhouette began to blur, like a photograph left in the rain. His form lost its solidity. It began to stretch, his torso elongated, his legs and arms thinning out into impossible, spindly lines. It was a horrifying thing to watch, like watching a person slowly melt and warp in real time. But it was silent, completely silent. There was no sound of tearing fabric or cracking bones, just the silent, awful transformation on the screen. His head tilted back at an angle that would have broken a neck, and then, in a sudden, fluid motion that made my stomach lurch, he wasn't a man at all. He collapsed in on himself, becoming a two-dimensional pool of blackness on the concrete floor. A shadow, identical in every way to the one I had been watching for months. It sat there for a moment, a stain on reality, and then it slid, smooth and swift, across the floor and melted directly into the wall. Leaving no trace, I fell back into my chair as if pushed, the cheap plastic groaning under my weight. My mind was a whirlpool of panic and dreadful understanding. It all clicked into place with a finality that was sickening. The permanent reassignment mentioned in the rules. The guards you never saw twice. The man from orientation with his utterly forgettable face. They didn't retire. They didn't transfer to a nicer facility with better hours. They became part of the ecosystem of the quiet hall. They became the phenomena. They became the shadow I saw every Tuesday and Thursday. Had that man once sat in this very booth? Had he watched a shadow and wondered what it was, only to eventually become one himself? Did he miss a button press, or was it just a matter of time? A slow erosion of self until the hall simply absorbed you. I looked at the clock. The digital numbers glowed a soft red. I had 3 minutes until my next button sequence. 58 minutes on the dot. A cold, clear certainty washed over me, cutting through the panic like a knife. I would not be pressing those buttons. I would not become a scheduled apparition in this concrete nightmare. I stood up, my legs feeling like water, threatening to buckle under me. I remembered the very first instruction, the one the man had delivered with such grave emphasis. If you ever miss that sequence by more than 10 seconds, you should just walk out. Not run, but walk directly to the surface and never look back. Never look back. I reached for the handle of my booth door. My hand was trembling so violently I had to use the other one to steady it. The door opened with a soft hiss of pressurized air. I stepped out into the main corridor. It was empty and silent. The air was cold and still. I didn't turn towards the usual elevator bank. That felt too expected, too much like a path they would watch. Instead, I turned left, towards a longer route that passed the maintenance lockers and eventually led to a stairwell that went up to the staff parking garage. I started walking, one foot in front of the other. I focused on keeping my pace steady. Normal. Just a guy walking back from his shift. Nothing to see here. But with every step, I could feel the pressure building behind me, a palpable sense of attention focusing on my back. It was like the air itself was thickening, becoming heavy. The entire facility, the very concrete around me, felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. The urge to turn around was a physical itch between my shoulder blades, a primal need to see what was there, to know what was following me. But the warning echoed in my head, a desperate mantra. Never look back. Never look back. I kept my eyes locked forward, on the gray door at the end of the corridor that led to the stairwell. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure it was echoing in the silence. Each step felt like a mile. Each second stretched into an hour. I finally reached the door. My hand closed around the cold metal of the push bar. I didn't pause. I didn't hesitate. I shoved it open and stepped through into the stark, concrete stairwell. The sound of the door closing behind me was like a gunshot in the emptiness. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my prescribed walk forgotten in a surge of adrenaline. I burst out into the cool night air of the parking garage. The smell of oil and dust was the sweetest thing I had ever experienced. My car was there, a beat-up sedan that suddenly looked like a chariot of freedom. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them on the asphalt. The clatter was terrifyingly loud. I snatched them up, my fingers clumsy and numb. I jammed the key into the lock, missing twice before finally getting it into the door. I fell into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The sound of the locks engaging was a small, fragile comfort. I turned the key. The engine sputtered to life. I didn't let it warm up. I just threw it into reverse and backed out, then slammed it into drive and headed for the exit. I didn't look at the rearview mirror until I was on the main access road, a strip of blacktop cutting through the endless desert. When I finally dared a glance, the facility was just a distant, huddled cluster of low, dark buildings, a speck of organized madness in the vast, indifferent emptiness. I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just drove east, chasing the faint glow on the horizon that promised a sun that still knew how to rise. I drove until the sky turned from black to gray to a pale, watery blue, and the sun broke over the mountains. I found a motel on the outskirts of a town so small it barely had a name. I paid in cash, and now I'm here, in a room that smells of stale cigarettes and bleach. But I can't stop thinking about that hallway. I can't unsee the man who turned into a shadow. My own reflection in the monitor feels suspect now, like it might decide to move on its own, and I keep checking the clock. My internal timer is still ticking down. 57 minutes, 56. I have this terrible, gnawing conviction that I didn't really escape, that you can't just walk away from a place that has already started to change you. I think I just changed the nature of my shift. I moved from being the watcher in the booth to being the one who is watched, and I know, with a certainty that feels like a stone in my gut, that the quiet hall has noticed my absence. It has noticed that I'm late for my button press, and it doesn't like loose ends. It's going to come looking for its newest permanent resident, and I don't know how, and I don't know when, but I know it's coming.